Mais there's also spin-offs. So one of the really interesting things for me when I was working on public service renewal, and what actually got me excited, was unofficial renewal. So there's a lot of really good stuff in the official renewal agenda, and I encourage you to check that out. And there's links if you're not familiar with it off the website. But there's actually it's encouraged a lot of other activity of unofficial renewal. Il y a par exemple des nouvelles voix. Il y a des fonctionnaires qui ont écrit des rapports sur le renouvellement, par exemple. Vous allez connaître peut-être un renouvellement qui dérange, qui a pris un titre un peu de Al Gore. Puis ça, c'est un blog cpsrenewal.ca que j'ai mis comme exemple. Il y a des blogs des fonctionnaires qui parlent hors du gouvernement, effectivement, des enjeux concernant comment on travaille. Il y a des nouveaux projets, des nouvelles façons de travailler, comme le wiki à NRCan. C'est très intéressant pour moi parce qu'ils ont pris vraiment une nouvelle approche à la gestion de risques. Ils ont dit, oui, on connaît qu'il y a des risques concernant les langues officielles, l'accès à l'information, tout ça, qui normalement empêchent ce genre de projet pilote et d'efforts. Mais ils ont dit, le plus grand risque, c'est de ne pas essayer avec quelque chose qui pourrait aider notre ministère si énormément à accomplir notre travail. Okay? Alors, ils ont fait un bouleversement du comment on pense des risques normalement. Ils ont dit le plus grand risque, c'est de ne pas essayer. Alors, ils ont lancé quelque chose. Et après ça, on voit maintenant qu'on a un effort pour tout le gouvernement qui s'appelle GCPDA. Et ça a été beaucoup facilité à cause du courage, on pourrait dire, de RNCAN qui ont lancé leur wiki. Et je vous encourage de voir ça aussi. You also have, bottom-up renewal, right? So individuals and networks and communities taking initiative. The one I like to highlight is the Youth Network at Citizenship and Immigration, which came up with an idea basically for a young newcomers internship program to basically have newcomers to Canada get a summer sort of 4-month kind of casual equivalent work experience with CIC as to give them some early work experience and exposure to what the government does, that kind of thing. And they came up with this idea, built a whole project proposal, sold it in the department all the way up to management, and launched it. And this was a youth network initiative essentially. Puis, on a ces projets. Moi, quand je vais aux autres groupes à parler, je décrivais toujours que ça, c'était une autre partie importante de renouvellement, un expériment, une nouvelle façon de travailler encore avec les technologies, la collaboration, l'engagement entre les gens. Alors, ça, c'est une autre partie importante. And the last one to highlight is this idea of a GEDS 2.0. We need we've got a great directory service. It does what it does pretty well, but it's fairly limited. So, building off all the other kind of Web 2.0 tools out there, the idea of having a new GEDS. And one of the models actually came from somebody outside the public service, David Eves, who kindly lets me share this graphic mock-up that he put together. And he envisaged sort of a lift off of a Facebook with your colleagues and the groups you're a part of and the policy causes you're interested in. I don't know if you can read, but the groups include I hate GEDS and I love GEDS. And this is something where it's very useful actually sometimes to have people outside the public service agitating for something you want, in accompaniment with people inside. And that's led to, with all the other sort of voices calling for this inside the public service as well, that's led to a pilot group that's putting together a GEDS 2.0 project. Where does all the kind of unofficial renewal come from? I'm going to further steal the title, say an inconvenient equation. So we talk about these two things in the public service a lot, leadership and management. And they're both really, really important, but they're not the same thing. And a lot of unofficial renewal comes from the leadership side of the equation. And it's the idea of leadership at all levels, right? You don't need to be in a management position to take leadership or to have some sort of formal authority. And that's where a lot of these innovative ideas are coming from the sort of leadership side of the public service. And it's complementary to really good management, and you need both. And a lot of public service renewal official is about sounder management, and that's really important. But there's also this concept of leadership at all levels that you see in something like that Youth Network initiative. And I say this strongly to you as well, because I was going out while working on renewal trying to, we sort of joked about agitating essentially, and trying to get people to think about what they could do on their own. What can you do in your own workplaces, in your own networks and communities? What initiatives can you take to try and improve the way we work? And it's something to keep in mind as this project moves into the last phase, not only in terms of thinking about public service renewal, but then at the end of the project, what do you take away and what do you do with that? In terms of thinking about the future of the public service and public service renewal, we thought it might be helpful to provide some of the kinds of questions to think about. So there was a document in the package, and you may have taken a look at, it's basically framed around these 5 questions that sort of deal with the how we work. Right, so the first 2 kind of deal with the who we are in the public service, and how we manage who we are, and then the latter 3 are essentially about how we work. And these are not meant to be limiting questions. There's kind of questions beyond these, and there's indeed a very important underlying question to all this, which is actually what's the role of government and what's the role of the public service look like in 10 years. But these are big questions. They really deal with a lot of different subject matter about how we work. If you take what kinds of people and skills, that ranges from the kind of skills side, who are we hiring and why, to what does kind of diversity and representativeness look like in the public service in 10 years? What does that mean? If you take a question like how we do our work, very broad ranging, right? Like what are the internal kind of tools and systems we have to support our work, the technologies, the culture of the organization. If you combine that with who else will we work with and tools, you start thinking about the institutions that we have. So it's a big, big space. The questions aren't meant to be limiting. They're meant to sort of help sort of provoke some thought and structure some of the kinds of questions that you want to think about in terms of the implications of your policy challenges for the public service. And so what I wanted to end with is a very quick sort of example, basically, just to, again, to the extent that this is not always an intuitive leap to make. And I had been thinking a little bit about sort of climate change adaptation. So, there's the important mitigation side, but what do you do to adapt to both climatic changes that are already sort of unfolding and those that we expect to come? So what does that mean for the public service? I mean, yes, you want to actually take some actions to adapt, but how do you prepare the public service to work on that policy challenge? And I'd wanted to give a couple of very quick examples. So, one is that from a people perspective, you need some translators, right? This is climate change adaptation deals with science and sort of projections. You need to understand science and statistics, and you need to connect that up with economic and social impacts on the other side. So you might need sort of the kinds of people, you might need some of these sort of translators who can make those bridges. In terms of how we do our work on the technology side, you need serious modeling capacity to be able to, if you're going to do your own kind of sort of testing of theories on climate change adaptation, right? So there's a technology piece of it. Another part of how we work and of who we work with is a lot of climate change adaptation is, of course, quite kind of localized in communities or regions. So that might pose interesting problems for the public service in terms of how, we had some problems historically sometimes, whether it's kind of our jurisdictional barriers to work across levels. So how do we deal with kind of local, municipal, regional sort of impacts at a federal level when that's what climate change adaptation is about? Another one is a cultural one, right? Short-termism versus long-termism. Climate change adaptation is about looking ahead. Often it's going to become less and less so, we anticipate, but there's still going to be a looking ahead element to it. So how do you sort of build the culture to actually be able to deal with problems like climate change adaptation that are actually about a kind of forward planning? So those are just some examples of, from one example, but it's the kind of questions, because it's often really some of the best things you can do to prepare to deal with all the policy challenges you've been working on, and to implement the policy options that you've been developing, because you think there might be good solutions to those policy challenges. A lot of that really often comes down to capacity, and you've probably all seen that happen, where there have been good ideas, and maybe those good ideas don't move like you expect them to, and a lot of times that's tied to the capacity of the organization. So do we have the people, the approaches to working, the partners and the ways of working with our partners to actually deal with your policy challenges? And that is absolutely critical, and it's going to be a complementary piece of the work for the next phase. C'est si compréhensif. Thanks.